In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hello, everyone. It's me again, Father Stephen. And this is class 46 of our Orthodox Survival course. And we're in the little mini section called Russia and the End of the World. And today is part B. And today we're going to talk about monarchism, nationalism, and reading true history. I'm going to recommend some authors, some of whose names might ruffle feathers, but that's good because you can't make omelets without breaking eggs. So we have to talk about controversial things and read controversial people sometime, because often controversial people actually have more intelligent things to tell us than mainstream, boring people. I'm doing this class soon after I released our last one, because our last class elicited some questions from listeners, and I thought I should respond as soon as possible. I do want to make my customary request for donations, but prefacing that by thanking my donors. You know who you are, and I deeply appreciate all of your contributions, both your monetary contributions and also your notes where you send your encouragement and your promise of prayer. That means a great deal to me. If anyone wants to help, you can send a gift to me by PayPal. You can use my email address, frstevenallen@gmail.com, and send me a gift through PayPal. If you want to receive a receipt for tax purposes, contact me at that email address, and I'll tell you how to send a contribution to our parish, and our parish treasurer can write you a receipt. So our course today, our class today, this section of our course, Faith Comes First, is supposed to focus on ecclesiological issues, especially the errors that we call ecumenism and surgeonism, and on the apostasy of the historical Orthodox hierarchies in the 20th and 21st centuries. And then connected to that, the task of discerning where the true church is in our times, with a view to our being in it, or getting into it, and staying in it, right, and finding our salvation. So this is intensely practical in reference to the most important thing in life, which is our salvation. But 2 classes ago, we dealt briefly with the history of ecumenism in the 20th century, chiefly in reference to the ecumenical patriarchate and its leadership in this apostasy, but also referring to the other patriarchates and the documents they signed and the shenanigans they've indulged in with the World Council of Churches and the Pope and so forth. And then in our last class, we began our discussion of the Russian Church in the 20th century and now the 21st century. And in our last class, I spent a lot of time giving background, especially on the saints of the second millennium in Russia, ending with St. John of Kronstadt, who reposes in 1908. Right? Besides St. John's spiritual character and St. John's theological traditionalism, which are very pronounced, right, I also refer to his hardcore positions on nationalism and monarchism. And these are 2 subjects that properly belong to our later sections on family and society. Remember, we're going to talk about faith and then family and then society. And so I could have, and probably should, save nationalism and monarchism for the section on society. But since I brought them up in reference to St. John of Kronstadt, and since they may be controversial, and I've already received some questions about it, I'd like to say a few things about these topics right now. So today we're going to have 2 excursus on monarchism and nationalism. An excursus means literally going out of your course, or out of your appointed round or your appointed route. You know, cursus in Latin is the word referring to a racetrack, or that's where we get our word course, both a race course and a school course. So an ex means, of course, out of, so out of course. We're going, and that's where we get our English word excursion. And by the way, excursus is 4th declension noun, so the plural of excursus is not excursi, it is excursus. So we're going to do 2 excursus today, one on monarchism and one on nationalism. And these are, of course, even though they're a little out of turn, even though they more strictly they belong to the section we're going to do on society, and of course we're going to come back to them, I promise you that. But they also will help us when we get back next week to our more examination of the more theological and spiritual aspects of the Russian Revolution, because of course all this is tied together. It can't be, they're distinct, but they're not separate. And by the way, I do apologize in both senses for my getting carried away last time. I know I got a little emotional when I was talking about St. John's hardcore position and his belonging to the Soyuz Ruskого Naroda, the Union of the Russian People. And also when I mentioned New High Martyr Vladimir of Kiev's position on monarchism and how a Republican priest is a bad priest, period. So I apologize in two senses. I apologize in the American sense of forgive me if my emotions or strong expression offended you. Okay, but I also I know I have a way to go in acquiring discretion, right, and using just the right words to convey truth at every moment without getting aggressive. But I also make an apologia. I apologize in the original sense, in the Greek sense. That is, I need to make a reasoned defense. I must defend my freedom to speak on controversial issues prior to my becoming a passionless elder, which probably won't happen until my final illness on my deathbed. I hope it happens before I die. Because I won't go through the toll houses very easily if I still am carrying passions with me, right? If I, or any sincere truth seeker, any sincere truth teller, if we get emotional or say rough things when we're talking about really important things that affect everybody, affect people that we love, right? That's a lot better. That just speaking up and sometimes getting carried away or saying something too rough or indiscreet, that's a lot better. It's actually a moral behavior, even if it's rough, than the immoral behavior of cowardly silence, which is the problem today. The problem today is not people are too rough. The problem is that people are cowardly and brainwashed and silent. What's happened is that the incensive power, right, the themos of, especially of men, especially of religious men, especially of patriarchal men, especially of patriarchal white Christian men, the incensive power has been neutered, right, by the brainwashing and political pressure and feminism and all these things. And men on the right side of life and death issues, men on the right side of life and death issues are being shamed into silence by effeminate whiners who claim to be offended by hyperbole or rough language, indiscreet expressions. So, anybody out there who was offended by my quoting St. Vladimir the New High Martyr of Kiev, saying that only a monarchist could be a good priest, this next sentence is for you. If you happen to be a liberal democratic priest listening to my talk somewhere out there, which I doubt, but if you happen to be a liberal democratic man who is also a priest, and therefore by St. Vladimir's definition not a good priest, if you happen to be one of these fellows listening to my talk somewhere out there, wherever you are, I assure you that I do have charitable thoughts about you, and I don't blame you, and I don't claim to know that you are, in our real life situation in 2019, that you are a bad priest. Right? I ascribe your position on political theory to ignorance, not malice, until you prove otherwise. Right? We should always ascribe bad behavior to ignorance first before we presume malice. Of course, if a person's stubborn, that means they have malice, right? Because malice means having bad will. That's literally malice. Malitia in Latin is bad will. So if you're out there, Mr. Liberal Democrat priest, maybe you're a product of St. Vladimir Seminary or just somebody who just hasn't thought these things through, and I don't condemn you or judge you, and certainly in St. Vladimir, the New High Martyr's time in 1918, he knew, he was talking about his own experience. Every single good priest he had in his diocese, or that in his whole experience, because he had been in several dioceses, every single good priest he knew had been a monarchist, and every single bad priest he knew had been a Republican, or rather every Republican priest he knew, every liberal priest he knew was a bad priest. But I don't, if you're a liberal Democrat priest out there, a secularist sort of priest out there, or say you're a layman who loves your priest, but you know he's kind of a lefty or an anti-monarchist or something, or he's like some neocon Republican or something like that. I'm not saying that your beloved priest is a bad priest, okay? So I'm just saying he doesn't know any better. It's important to remember that you cannot isolate orthodoxy as purely a theological position. You can't isolate church membership as something divorced from the rest of your life. Okay? Orthodoxy does not only have a theology. Orthodoxy is concerned about the whole man, concerned with the good of the true good of the whole man. Therefore, Orthodoxy also is concerned with anthropology, with domestic or family life, right? Sociology, politics, and all the rest. There is no subject that is essential to understanding man's life in this world that is foreign to the church's concerns. There is no subject that is essential to understanding man's life in this world that is foreign to the church's concerns, because she was founded by Christ to save people as they really are, right? Not people in the abstract. When people say, the church should not get involved in politics, or the arts, or education, or the family, or medicine, or anything else, besides having beautiful rituals and constructing magnificent church buildings and, having ethnic festivals and banquets. When people say the church should not get involved in politics or the arts or education or family or medicine or anything else, what they really mean is that because of their passions, because of their selfishness, because of their worldliness, they want Satan to rule man's life, not Christ. In Soviet times, the priest could give a sermon about the First Ecumenical Council, or hesychastic prayer, or the Typicon, all he wants. But let that priest get up and talk about the education of children, or family life, he'd be gone in a minute. He'd be gone before the next Sunday. He'd be in a boxcar on the way to Siberia, or he'd be dead. Because what the Soviets did not want precisely was the priest affecting the real lives of those real people, bringing Christ into their day-to-day life, where the rubber hits the road. That's what Soviets didn't want. That's what the liberals today don't want. That's what Lucifer always wants, is to make our faith something purely abstract, or a historical artifact, or just beautiful rituals, or parties, or magnificent buildings, and not our life. Okay. So there's no value-neutral position on how men live their lives. There is no value-neutral position on how men live their lives. You are either with Christ or you are against Christ. There is an orthodox way of looking at everything. There is an orthodox way of looking at everything. As I've said before, politics is not a dirty word. It's become a dirty word because people think about the corruption of politicians. Right? But politics in and of itself means something very specific, and it's very positive, which is the science and art of arranging life in the greater community beyond the family hearth. And this life in the greater community beyond the family hearth is essential to a truly human life. Right? The family can only accomplish so much. We also need the polis, or the greater political community. Aristotle calls politics the highest level of ethical philosophy because politics incorporates all of the ethical wisdom involving every level of society, the individual, the family, and the clan, and brings it all together in a comprehensive vision. A parallel would be architecture. Okay, architecture is the queen of the visual arts because it incorporates all of the various visual arts in an ensemble that's actually a microcosm of the universe. Right? So architecture is the queen of the visual arts. Politics is the queen of the ethical science. Of course, God, who loves mankind, God naturally is interested in how man arranges his life, right? Because God created man. And God's church, therefore, has a position on this. So God cares about politics, and therefore the church cares about politics. They should not surprise or offend anybody, especially an Orthodox Christian. Although, sadly, because of the brainwashing, it does offend some people who are baptized Orthodox Christians. Even people consider themselves pious. And this is because of the way they've been educated, because of the brainwashing that we've all undergone, this whole separation of church and state, and my life outside of church, my life's a secular life, it's only a religious life inside the church building, and that kind of thing. So Since I wandered willy-nilly into these topics last time when I got carried away with St. John of Kronstadt and probably aroused a little controversy among some of our listeners, today we're going to put our chronology of the Russian Church in the 20th century in reference to ecumenism and Sergianism. We're going to put that on hold, and we're going to make two excursus. Remember, fourth declension, masculine. The plural is not excursi, it's excursus. We're going to make two excursus into these sparky topics, these topics that spark discussion, arouse emotion. Right? We're going to make two excursus into these two sparky topics of monarchism and nationalism. They are not inapplicable, of course, to our understanding of the spiritual meaning of the Church's history in recent times. And what we learn today is going to help us understand the ecclesiological issues that are the proper subject of this section of our course. We will, of course, get back to our specific ecclesiological topics of ecumenism and Sergianism, because that is the focus of this current section of our course. But today we're going to make an excursion. We're going to have two excursus. Excursus alpha, monarchism. First of all, the theological aspect of monarchism. We actually had at St. Irene in our adult classes, starting back in the fall of 2016, we actually had a course before we started our survival course in the fall of 2017. In the fall of 2016, we started a course on the Orthodox view of politics. And we did this at our parish of St. Irene, and I have a couple of recordings. I don't seem to have recorded the whole course. I'm not sure why. But at least I think I have two or three, and I'm going to post them on Speaker. And I'll talk about that later. We did a course on Orthodox politics, which of course included a lot about monarchy, based on a book by Vladimir Moss, a short book, a monograph called Politics from Cain to Constantine. I mentioned Vladimir Moss last time. His site is called Orthodox Books, or Orthodox Christian Books. Just search Vladimir Moss, Orthodox author, and you'll pull up, his site will be the first thing on the list of stuff that the search engine finds. And look for his book, Politics from Cain to Constantine, and also I'm going to link the book in my notes here that are going to appear in my blog, orthodoxtruth.org. I mentioned Moss last time. Brief note on Moss. Okay, who's Vladimir? A lot of us know about Vladimir Moss. Some of you have never met Vladimir or never heard of Vladimir. So Vladimir Moss is a gentleman who lives in what used to be merry old England, now is kind of sad New England. But he lives in my beloved ancestral land of the English, and in Surrey, in a lovely place. And Vladimir Moss has spent years, decades, as a serious, nearly full-time researcher into topics relating to the Orthodox faith, Orthodox nations, Orthodox history, and so forth. And Vladimir Moss has aroused a lot of controversy. So that's a sign that somebody is taken seriously, right? When people hate him. So, do I hate Vladimir? No, I like Vladimir. Vladimir is a friend of mine, and we don't agree about everything. And what I tell people, and what I told my daughter years ago, my eldest child met him years ago, and was going to his parish when during the time she would spend in England. And I would say, Vladimir is very sincere, and he has a very fine mind, and read his books as a resource, but don't take the man himself as your guide, right, in the spiritual life, or every single question of Orthodox theology, or what jurisdiction you should belong to, right? Of course, he has opinions about all those things, but just because his opinions don't agree with mine, that doesn't mean he's a bad guy. And the virtue of Vladimir Moss is that he does serious research. He reads and reads lots of books, and he reads books in the Russian language that most of us don't read. Even people who read Russian don't read a lot of these sources. And if you want to argue with Vladimir, or if you want to argue with any serious researcher, that's fine, but you have to do your homework. You can't just say, oh, you're wrong, you're stupid, you're crazy, I don't like what you write. Look at Vladimir's work. He footnotes extensively, and his footnotes aren't fluff. He's really going to sources, and he's quoting real people. So Vladimir Moss is a great resource, but remember what I said last time. Part of being a grown-up is you can learn from somebody you don't always agree with. So Vladimir's importance, you can measure it by the intensity with which people love him and hate him, and they do both. That's going to apply to somebody else I'm going to talk about today as well. So getting back, so that's my little footnote on Vladimir Moss. I value my relationship with Vladimir. We're not in the same jurisdiction at the moment, and he's actually attacked jurisdictions I've been associated with in the past. But I don't hold that against him, right? These are tough times, and we're all trying to figure out where we belong. But he's a serious historian, and I would take a lot of his work quite seriously. And the things I disagree with, well, I disagree. We agree to disagree. But this book, it's a really good book. It's called Politics from Cain to Constantine. Politics from Cain to Constantine. It's on Vladimir's site. And I'll put the link here in my notes. It'll appear in my blog. And we did a course on this. And I'm going to open another little speaker channel, or rather a speaker show on my channel, and call it Orthodox Politics. And I'll put the 2 or 3 MP3 recordings we have of these classes we did on this, including today I'm going to put the first class that we did on this, which summarizes a lot of good material. But let's talk about the biblical and patristic background of monarchism. First of all, God is king, right? You go through the whole scriptures, and when it uses an image of authority for God, it's father or king, some kind of patriarchal or regal image. You never see God referred to as first magistrate, as a proconsul, as president, right? As first citizen. God is always the king, or he's the father of us all. And fatherhood and kingship are closely related. And the nation, the family, the clan, and the nation are part of a great hierarchy of being, right? Reality is hierarchical, and God is at the top of this hierarchy, and he is an autocrat. He is the king. So a monarch is an image and representative of the divine authority. Like a legitimate authority comes from above to below, not from below to above. That doesn't mean that a king cannot be elected. The Byzantine emperors, constitutionally, theoretically, were elected by the Senate or by the church or by the populace. Originally, going very back to the early constitution of the Roman Republic, where the consuls, who actually were just carrying on the regal authority, because remember the Romans were very conservative, so the Romans never made radical changes in their constitution. They always preserved earlier theory and earlier forms, no matter what changes they enacted. So even the consuls in the Republican period had the imperium of the total absolute imperium of the king of the kings whom they had gotten rid of, but they still had these consuls. So once a man was in office, theoretically he was elected by the Comitia Curiata, the Assembly of the People. But that year that he was a consul, he had the full regal authority in conjunction with his fellow consul, right? So, and in the Byzantine period, the emperors theoretically were elected by the populace or by the Senate or the church or somebody, right? But once he was emperor, he was autocrat. Then he was answerable to God, right? The Anglo-Saxon kings were elected by the Witan, which is the council of the leading nobles and the bishops. That's how we know that, for example, King Harold, the last Anglo-Saxon king, no matter what the supporters of William might say, he was truly the king because he was elected by the Witan and he was anointed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Okay, so a king could be elected, but that doesn't mean that his power descends from below. His power descends from above. It descends from God. The election was just a mechanism, not the source of his authority. Okay, so a monarch is an image and representative of divine authority, and also the fatherhood of God. Fatherhood, patriarchy, and kingship are closely connected, and I expound on that in the MP3 of that first class on our course from Politics from Cain to Constantine that I'm going to post in that new show I just talked about. And of course, the biblical precedent is in, first of all, the entire patriarchal foundation of society we see from Adam and Eve all the way through the scriptures, right? There's patriarchy in the family, and then patriarchy in the clan. Then the nation is an extended clan. And what we see is that, of course, the people are ruled by prophets and priests and judges until the time of King Saul. And there's a famous episode in First Kings, which the Protestants call First Samuel, but we Orthodox and the Catholics call it First Kings, where the people want a king. And Samuel warns them, well, the king's going to tax you, he's going to draft your sons, blah, blah, blah. And God says, well, they don't want me to be their king, okay, I'll give them a king. Now, some anti-monarchical theorists say, well, that shows that God disapproves of monarchy, of human monarchy, but that's not true. Because God is saying, yes, that the people were pure if they were truly completely a holy people. They would let me rule them directly through my mouthpiece, through the priestly and prophetic ministries. But that's not where they're at. So I'm going to give them a king, but I'm going to have you anoint the king. That means the king is God's chosen, God's anointed, God's beloved, and God's representative. So just as all government really is because of original sin, right? Because people can't control their passions. So the theocratic monarchy in the Old Testament was founded because, yes, the people weren't perfect. But once it was founded, once God established a kingship, then the king is his beloved, the king is his chosen, the king is his anointed. And how many images there are throughout the scriptures, especially in the Psalms, of God being the king, and then God expressing his favor of King David and the Davidic line being the source of the coming of the Messiah, providing the actual heredity of the Messiah. So there is tremendous biblical precedent for monarchy. And of course, there's historical precedent in all. The history of the Orthodox nations, republics are very rare, they're very recent, and they don't work. And what we've seen is that in the flourishing times of Orthodoxy and the Orthodox nation, it was some kind of monarchy, whether the Byzantine autocracy that had its distant roots in the Roman constitutional system, or the Russian autocracy, which is more of a absolute and hereditary autocracy. But the Anglo-Saxon kings, who were originally tribal chieftains, right? Who then become, through the historical process that created the Anglo-Saxon or the Old English nation, become this anointed of God through the blessing and the anointing by the Archbishop of Canterbury. So there's biblical and historical precedent for monarchy. There's no biblical or historical precedent for republicanism. It just doesn't exist, right? Even if you like it, you think it's a good idea, you can't point to biblical or patristic or historical in the history of Orthodox nations precedent for an Orthodox republic. Now, a good question at this point is, does monarchism in the civil realm justify the full-blown papal ideology, where the Pope is not simply the first among equals, but he's an ecclesiastical planetarch, right? And I apologize for using the word planet. I don't really believe in the word planet because I'm a geocentrist, but you know what I mean. World ruler, okay? So there's I don't believe the Earth is a planet. The others are planets. The Earth is because the Earth is standing still. So does the political idea of monarchy as the correct form of government for Orthodox Christians? Well, the papists can take that and say, well, you say that the state should be monarchical. Shouldn't the church be monarchical? And our response to that is that analogy doesn't work, because we do not advocate, and neither the Scriptures nor the Holy Fathers nor the Church's history advocates a one world government. Right? Each nation has its monarch, but not one world government is an antichrist conception, and therefore one world government of the church is an antichrist conception, which is why the Orthodox have always consistently said that the Pope, after the schism and after he created the heresy of papal supremacy in its full-blown sense, right, where he has direct, absolute jurisdiction over every soul, that this is an antichrist chiliastic theory. Of course, good Roman Catholic apologists have their way around this. No, it's not chiliastic. We're not saying we're bringing the kingdom of God on earth. We're not claiming that, but they are claiming that. And it's ineluctable from the tenets of direct absolute papal supremacy. So no, monarchism is not a justification for full-blown papal ideology. But by the way, I do want to say that there are some great books that you could read that could inform you about good insights into Christian political theory. And they're books by a man named Father Denis Fahey, D-E-N-I-S, Fahey, F-A-H-E-Y. He's an Irish Roman Catholic priest. I think he belonged to the Congregation of the Holy Ghost. He was a Holy Ghost father. He died in the 1950s, and he has a lot of good writings, but his two magna opera, so to speak, are called The Mystical Body of Christ in the Modern World and The Mystical Body of Christ and the Reorganization of Society. Father Fahey's books are just beautiful, and if it wasn't that he was advocating papal supremacy, they'd be very suitable for Orthodox audiences. As it is, you have to adjust what he says. So if you just take Father Fahey's books, you can get a lot of wisdom from there and just sort of, forgive him for putting the Pope at the top of this power structure, right? But if you just take his insights about economics and about political theory and the role of the family, and also his knowledge about the secret societies and other groups that were bringing about the destruction of Christian civilization, and then just kind of park his papist ideology on the side, the books are very suitable for Orthodox. And remember, again, part of being a grown-up is you can learn from people you don't entirely agree with. So don't go tell people, Father Stephen is telling people to read Catholic books and become Catholics. That's a dumb or a simplistic caricature, right, of what's going on here. So the monarch then is an image of God. Monarchy is established by God. Monarchy is the precedent in Orthodox history. So what is the historical role that we actually see monarchs playing? One very important role, and this is very important in light of our current situation, is that monarchs traditionally restrained, good monarchs, the ones who truly loved their people and were protecting their people, restrained the power of finance. They restrained the power of oligarchy based on wealth. The king was not behold, the king could just say by fiat, by decree, you have to remit the debts of all these people to an oligarch who's making money through usury. And this is how the kings protected, especially the agrarian peasant class. Now they protected also the wealth of the hardworking artisan middle class from predatory financial elites. And of course, a person I have to refer you to on this subject is Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson. Like Vladimir Moss, a lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him, but you can't not pay attention to him. All right, a lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him, but you can't not pay attention to him. And his site is rusjournal.org, rusjournal.org. And a lot of articles on philosophy, on politics, on Russia, on the Ukraine, on economics, on race, and a lot of issues. That doesn't mean you don't become a Johnsonite, right? You don't just blindly believe everything that Dr. Johnson says. Or you could also call him Father Raphael. He's an ordained priest in a true Orthodox jurisdiction, not my own. But he's Father Raphael Johnson, but he's also Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson. And he's a serious guy. So you can't just blow him off. You have to, if you want to argue with him, you have to read all the stuff he's read and take him on. But he has a lot of good articles, and I have to give him credit for first introducing me to this idea that one of the important roles of the king, the autocratic monarchical authority, whose obedience is to God and whose loyalty is to his people, is that he is above the financial elites that suck the blood of the people. So he can first of all, he can keep the currency, the control of the currency, the printing of the minting of coin, the printing of currency in the hands of the people of the nation of which he is the embodiment, and not allow the wealth of the nation to be privatized, or i.e. looted, right, by plutocratic oligarchs. And also there's a book by a man named Michael Hudson, who's an economist. It's a book on debt and monarchy. It's a book on debt, and it's a book on the role of monarchy versus oligarchy. It's called "And Forgive Them Their Debts." And forgive them their debts. Now, Michael Hudson is not a Christian. He's not looking at it from the point of view of the Bible being the revealed Word of God. He's looking at it. He's a specialist in ancient Near Eastern history, so he's basically an Assyriologist. So he's looking at ancient codes, the Code of Hammurabi and other Near Eastern states, and also then the biblical injunctions about forgiving debt, the Jubilee year, and so forth, and illustrating how the role of the monarch has always been. But then he takes it up to modern times. You see, so there's a consistent theme throughout history. How the monarch is the protector of the people, and he protects them precisely from the predations, the predatory behavior of the financial elites, the plutocratic, that is, a wealth-based oligarchy, who are always looking to privatize the assets of the nation, meaning to steal everybody's stuff, right, and have control over people through this illegitimate source of authority, which is money. Money is an illegitimate source of authority. I'll say this again. Money, wealth, is an illegitimate source of authority. In modern times, people think of class, and this is another concept, right, that Matthew Rayfield Johnson often talks about. Americans, or modern liberal people, think of class as based on wealth. Oh, you're high class because you have $1 million in the bank, or you have a six-figure salary, and you're middle class because you make $70,000 a year, and you're lower class because you're on welfare. Okay, that is it reveals the crass, materialistic, stupid mentality of the society we live in, right? Because traditionally, class is based on the history of your family, on your role in society, your role of service to the society, of the particular gifts, functions, skills, basically your function in the society, right? You could be an aristocrat from an ancient family who's born and bred to the service of your nation and has a distinguished career as an aristocrat and be absolutely broke, right? But your place in society is based on the honor given to your family because of its history of self-sacrificial service, right? So monarchy restrains oligarchy. True aristocracy is based on the ethic of self-sacrificial service. It's very relevant to today because today the plutocrats own everything, right? We have to remember the United States is not a free nation. The United States is a private asset owned by a cabal of a few families of financiers. Okay, let's face it, right? So if God ever sent us a monarch, he would have to clean that Augean stable, right, of these people, jail them, execute them, something, I don't know, but because they've looted the wealth of our nation and many nations. So the king is a living embodiment of his people. He's the father of his people. He's the living embodiment of national tradition. He's a living embodiment of the Constitution. Remember, until recent times, the Constitution was not a written piece of paper. Okay, people say, well, the American Constitution is such a great advance because they wrote down the Constitution. Well, guess what? Great nations survived for centuries without a written Constitution because the organic traditions of the people were carried in the hearts of the people, in the minds of the people, and also were embodied in the ruling classes, in the kings and the aristocrats, their pronouncements, their judgments. They're defending the tradition of their people. Even Great Britain still to this day has an unwritten constitution. So life goes on without a written constitution. So the king is a living embodiment of national tradition, of the national constitution, and he is also the primary. He's free. He's free to protect and to rule, unlike politicians who are almost inevitably end up being controlled by financial elites, by whoever's going to put money in their pocket, right? And the downfall of the modern monarchies, as I spoke about earlier in our classes on the Renaissance and the rise of usury-based economics, the fall of the monarchies in Europe was when the kings became debtors to the usurers. They went into debt. to build their giant modern armies and so forth and so on. They didn't keep control over their country's finances, and guess what? A foreign element, a cosmopolitan element, not loyal to the country, but loyal into their own pockets, takes over the country. But a good king won't let that happen. Okay. So now a question now is monarchism and America, because one listener wrote me and said, "Well, what about we're Americans? You know, we got rid of monarchy back in 1776. Or what, are we supposed to agitate for a monarchy, or how do we live in our society today?" And so there's America and being an American, and I'm an American. I'm an American of Americans. As you know, Paul said he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. Well, I'm an American of Americans. My ancestors came here hundreds of years ago. We're the people who actually cleared the wilderness and fought the Indians and created this, built this beautiful country so the rest of you guys could come here and enjoy it. So I'm proud of America. I love being an American. And so I too feel this question. I'm not answering this as someone who doesn't feel the weight of that question. So there's monarchism in America. How do you be an Orthodox monarchist and still be a good American, right? And then also this bigger question, is an Orthodox republic even possible? Is it possible to have a republic? Of course, it is possible to have a republic where an Orthodox church is functioning, but is it possible to have a true symphonia in the Byzantine sense between the Orthodox Church and a republic? So I'm going to back off from the question of America, back off from that bigger question, and let's do a little homework. Let's go back and look at Aristotle's model of the three possible forms of government. And I'll also speak about this. This is going to be the little charts in my notes that you're going to see in orthodoxtruth.org. And also I'm going to speak about this in that first class on politics that I also am going to post on the Spreaker channel. So excuse me. So, according to Aristotle, theoretically there are three possible forms of good government. The possible forms of good government are monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. So in monarchy you're ruled by a king or a single ruler. Aristocracy you're ruled by like a college or a brotherhood or a network, a caste of aristocrats. And then democracy is ruled by the people. And then each of these good forms has its evil twin, right? Monarchy can degenerate into tyranny. Okay? Aristocracy degenerates into oligarchy. And democracy degenerates into ochlocracy, which means mob rule. Oklos in Greek is a mob. So demos is the people, right? So the people ruled by the people degenerates into ruled by the mob, which of course ruled by the mob doesn't last very long because the trains cannot possibly run on time. So people clamor for a tyrant, and they get some kind of authoritarian or totalitarian government. And of course, we spoke. I've already spoken at some length about a true monarch, what a true monarch is, and also about aristocracy. So now here's Aristotle. He's living in the polis, born and bred exemplar of the polis of Athens. But he's also surrounded by Greek city-states that have a king. So he's not saying, well, we Athenians, we're the only ones who know how to run the show. And also, if you look at Athenian democracy, it is nothing like what people think of today as democracy. Athenian democracy was aristocratic. It was limited, the franchise and the power in the state was limited to free men born in Athens. And it was also deeply tied to the Athenian religion. So it was religious, had a sacral character, it was patriarchal, it was nationalistic, it was bound by tradition, and frequently, frankly, the Athenians ended up having a tyrant anyway. And tyrant originally didn't even have a bad connotation, it just meant a man who took over for a while to make the trains run on time. So people think of Pericles, as the age of Pericles, as the acme of Greek Athenian democracy, and actually Pericles functioned as a tyrant. All right, so Aristotle has this model, and we've already talked about the reality that aristocracy only works if the aristocracy is born and bred to the service of the nation. They think of themselves as a sacrificial class, and they are aristocrats because they are aristos. Aristos means excellent. It also is the word that the Greeks use for virtuous. Excellent. Areti, virtue is excellence, right? So they have these excellent qualities. They're virtuous. I'm an aristocrat in view of the history of my family being born and bred to the service of the nation. And myself then, in my generation, I'm embodying these virtues. And I'm as the king is the first in battle to fall, I'll be the second in battle to fall. Right after the king, I'm going to sacrifice myself for my nation. And this is, and we see in societies where the nobility lived close to the people, and where the peasantry saw that the nobility were indeed self-sacrificial. There's this beautiful bond between the local nobility and the peasantry, that this is a real functioning familial society as opposed to these artificial vicious relationships between employer and employee that you see in the modern industrialized cities. So then there's democracy ruled by the people, which can work, but it's really unwieldy. It's very, very difficult for a democracy to work. That's why it almost inevitably becomes a clacracy, and which degenerates into, which Plato points us out, that Plato says democracy is the worst form of government because to stay in power, the democratic politicians have to appeal to lower and lower passions, right? That's how democracy, I don't have to convince anyone of this. Just look at the scene. To stay in power, a politician makes promises that cater to passions, then the next guy has to cater to lower passions to get more votes. And that's how it goes. So it degenerates into a clacracy, which then brings about some kind of either oligarchy or tyranny ruling over the people to keep things in order. Are there examples of successful republics? There are. Look at the Republic of Venice, which lasted for centuries. Okay, as one example. Look at the early American Republic from, say, the adoption of the Constitution in 1789 to the War of Northern Aggression in 1861. The days of the early Republic. Okay, these are, they're very different examples, but which is good because they're very contrasting societies that actually where the Republican system worked. But successful republics all have something in common, successful republics have always had several things in common. One is that they're of a limited size. Okay, they're statelets, so to speak, or they're states on a human scale, a polis, a small group. Even though America, the 13 colonies were a big place, it was still highly localized societies, and the people are very homogeneous. Okay, so it's when America started its imperial expansion that then the republic disappeared, right? So republics of limited size, and the people are homogeneous, right? They understand each other. As Edmund Burke would say in his Reflections on the French Revolution, they share the same prejudices. A prejudice in a good sense of a prejudgment that enables you to talk to each other, not have to keep on defining everything, right? You can live together, right? So successful republics have always been religiously and racially and culturally homogeneous and of a limited size. And successful republics always have some kind of an aristocracy, a true aristocracy, where the men running the show are truly excellent. They're truly virtuous. And also another aspect is that a successful republic has a highly literate and educated ruling class. The aristocrats who run the republic are educated. They're learned. They're virtuous, and so they keep things going. Okay, they don't. But once it degenerates into a vicious group of people, then it becomes an oligarchy, right? But the problem of the republic, even of the best republics like Venice, I've named, or the early American Republic, right? And we can, besides Venice, we can name so many of the Italian city-states and so forth. The problem with republics is they have a natural tendency to commercialism, They have a natural tendency to commercialism. Look at Venice, the great commercial republic. Look at America. Okay, and so they develop a bourgeois culture that is a culture based on the cities and based on trade, rather than based on the countryside and based on a nobility of warfare and of service and of honor. So the republic ends up being based around a city culture, bourgeois, or city. Bourgeois means, it's French, right? For bourgeois means relating to the city, right? Bourgeois culture, and it's inherent incompatibility with the gospel. A bourgeois culture, and I'm not talking about the bourgeois. When I say bourgeois, you're probably thinking, oh, is Father Stephen a Marxist? He's against the bourgeoisie. Remember, everything Marx said was a lie, right? So all of his terminology is meaningless. It's the opposite of what it meant. Marx called anybody who owned a horse and a native land a bourgeois, right? So that's nonsense. That's just a code word that the Marxist-Leninists used to slaughter people. So we're talking about bourgeois in the original sense of a man who lives in the city and makes his living through trade, not through working the land, or not through aristocratic and military service to the society. Not a clergyman, not an aristocrat, not a scholar, but a tradesman. So the aristocracy of a republic naturally tends to derogate or to decline or to degenerate into a bourgeois financial elite or trade elite. And this has an inherent incompatibility with the gospel, right? That should be obvious. And there's a good article by Christopher Dawson. I've mentioned Dr. Dawson many classes ago, early in our course. He was a great Roman Catholic historian of the 20th century. And he has an article called Catholicism and the Bourgeois Mind. But almost everything he says about Catholicism could also be predicated of orthodoxy in this essay. Catholicism and the Bourgeois Mind. And this is in a collection called Dynamics of World History, published by ISI Books in 2007. ISI is the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. It's a publisher that publishes many excellent conservative and even beyond conservative, paleo-conservative and traditionalist-oriented works. ISI Books, 2000. Christopher Dawson. The article is called Catholicism and the Bourgeois Mind, and it's in Dynamics of World History. So he lays this out, right? That there's a tendency of the commercial elites to cosmopolitanism also. Okay, what is cosmopolitanism? We'll see below. I'm going to talk on a reference. Later I'm going to refer to St. Metropolitan Philaret and his words about cosmopolitanism and his work on the law of God. So cosmopolitanism is the idea that I'm a citizen of the world. My loyalty is to my pocket and maybe my own family, but we're transnationals, right? We roam around to different countries making money wherever we can. We'll blend in, we'll pretend to be loyal, but, basically we're parasites. So that there's a tendency of commercial and financial elites to cosmopolitanism and therefore disloyalty to any one nation. And remember that the tie of money, what ties together commercial republics or a commercial oligarchy, a republic that's degenerated like the United States into basically a privately held social experiment. But what ties people together? Why do people come to America now? They come for the money, right? They come for the money. And so the only tie left in our society is the coercion by the government and money. People make money off each other. And the tie of money is unnatural. When money is your tie with each other, that's an unnatural relationship, and it encourages vice. The Holy Fathers say, if you read the Holy Fathers on the passion of avarice, they'll say that avarice is the most unnatural. It's the only completely unnatural vice. Every other vice is related to something in our nature, but avarice alone is completely unnatural. And this is in the Holy Fathers. You'll see this starting with the Institutes of John Cassian, where he goes through the 8 principal faults. Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages. I know he's not Orthodox, but he is, in many ways, a very competent, or very, very insightful, natural and political and philosopher and economic philosopher. Aquinas points out that in a society where the commercial element dominates, the growth of vice is inevitable. Okay? In a society where the commercial element dominates, the growth of vice is inevitable. And speaking of Aquinas, by the way, interesting little footnote here. Okay, I know there are some people. You're going to go back to somebody. Going to go back to your priest and say, Father Stephen quoted Aquinas, and the priest will say, "Oh, that's terrible. Father Stephen must be a crypto-papist. He's a scholastic. He's a Latin because he quotes Aquinas." Well, I've got news for you. Two of the greatest anti-unionists in the 16th century. The 15th century, the 1400s. Joseph Vrienos, and of all people, George Scholarius, who later became the patriarch Gennadios Scholarius, two of the great anti-Latins, anti-unionists, who were supporters of St. Mark of Ephesus at the time of the Council of Florence, and who were anti-unionists right up to the end, to the fall of the city, and then Scholarius becomes the first post-Byzantine patriarch. They liked Thomas Aquinas. In his translation of the Summa, Scholarius prefaces it by saying that if Thomas had not fallen to error about the filioque and the distinction between the essence and the energies, he would have been not only a great philosopher, but a great theologian. And but he was a great philosopher. So that's just a footnote. Just in case anybody's freaked out by an Orthodox priest quoting Aquinas. Okay, again, we're not afraid of Aquinas, right? He doesn't have cooties. So he points out, Aquinas and the fathers point out, that avarice is very unnatural, and so in a society based on commercial relations, vice is inevitable. Unnaturalness is inevitable in such a society. Everything gets distorted. On the other hand, the ties of blood and soil and culture and religion, even religion on the natural level, even non-Orthodox religion, these ties are natural and they encourage virtue. Okay? And of course, then if you add the divine virtues that come from divine grace, the grace builds on nature. So you can't build on avarice because there's nothing there to build on. You can't build on money. There's nothing there to build on. But grace can build on shared DNA, right? Blood, race, soil, cultural inheritance, and that's historically what the church did build on when she went forth to catechize the nations. Now let's talk about America. Big topic, right? Most of us listening to this, not all of us, some of us are listening to this abroad in the mother country in England and in other places throughout the world, wherever the English is spoken, which is now everywhere. But America is, of course, uppermost in everybody's, or not, if not uppermost, and always on everybody's mind nowadays, because we've inherited the mantle, right? The British actually dominated the world scene for centuries, and the Americans are the inheritors of this. So everybody has America on the brain, one way or the other. What was the founders' intention? The founders' intention was this. The intention of the founders, beyond any reasonable doubt, was to create an aristocratic and peaceful, not democratic and warlike, an aristocratic and peaceful republic that belonged to one race and one religion, that is, Northwestern European racial type, and one religion, some kind of Christianity. Their intention was to create an aristocratic and peaceful republic of one race and one religion based on virtue and learning. John Adams said that the Constitution we've created is only useful for a virtuous and religious people. In the early republic, only 5% of the population voted. I have to give a hat tip to MRJ, to Matthew Raphael Johnson. I just heard him quote this datum, in a recent talk he just did just now on the Trump impeachment farce. And but where he goes is usually he does. He's not content with just current passions, but goes back into the historical and theoretical bases of the American Constitution. So in the early republic, only 5% of the population voted. Why? Because only free male heads of household who owned property paid taxes, and were not on public assistance could vote. I'll say that again. In the the American early republic, and I can really say our because my people were around then. In the early republic, only 5% of the population voted. They were the free, not slaves, free male heads of household who owned property, paid taxes, and were not on public assistance. Okay. Why? These are the men who had a stake in the stability and prosperity of the society. They were also the best and smartest people. And this embodied the patriarchal principle, which was created by God in paradise, and which every stable society has had since that time, right? They also, that they were literate was a given. These were all literate men. And also, supporting this aristocracy was a large yeomanry that owned small farms. These are the ideal citizens in Jefferson's conception. The Jeffersonian Republic, right, is based on the yeomanry. The northeastern New England idea of the Republic is based on a literate class of intellectual aristocrats, clergy, and schoolmarms. But both of these ideas were an aristocratic conception. But today's reality, of course, America is nothing like this now, right? Today's reality is that it's a multicultural, vast empire, not even spreading not only over the 48 states and Alaska and Hawaii, but has its tentacles throughout the world, right? A multicultural empire owned, which is actually not a legitimate polity at all, because the people don't have control over the state. It's owned. It's an asset. It's a private asset of an anti-Christian and anti-white oligarchy, an oligarchy based on vice and ignorance, right? Keeping people ignorant, right? So we have plutocratic, Satan worshippers, pedophiles, people like that who are just like super trillion billionaires who own everything, or if they don't own it, they control it because of the power of their wealth. And they hate the original race that founded America, who are the Europeans, and they hate Christ, and they own everything. Okay, so that's America today, and so it's obviously the Republic's long gone. Okay, now what is an Orthodox? Okay, whether you're an Orthodox monarchist living back in the days of the early Republic, or whether you're an Orthodox monarchist living today. Say, here's Father Stephen. I'm the descendant of American Republic. Republicans with a small r, not Republicans with a big r. I mean, as a child, I don't think I knew any Republicans. Back down in the South, everybody was a Democrat until the Democratic Party betrayed us in the 50s and 60s. So say you're an Orthodox monarchist, whether you're like me, the descendant of American Republicans, or you come from another country where they actually had a history of monarchy in recent times. So we're Orthodox monarchists. We're living under this American system. What do? Well, we obey the laws of our society that don't conflict with the law of God. I'll tell you one thing also. I still love America, and the beauty of the American system. And Mr. Welch, who founded the John Birch Society, often point this out. At the great genius and the beauty of the American system, and we inherit this from the Anglo-Saxon and British constitutional tradition, is that we have layers of defenses in the American system. They've been trying so hard to kill us for so long. They still haven't killed us. It's amazing, right? And I can still leave. I live in a small town in rural Michigan, but my church is back in the Detroit metropolitan area. Okay, so when I love my church and I love my parishioners, so I go there, but I don't love anything else about it, right? Because you're in Detroit, and Detroit is not America, right? Detroit is this nightmare, and I don't mean just I mean Detroit's an extreme example because it's right. The city itself is ruined, right? It's Somalia, but even the nice parts, right, where our church is, nice suburbs and so forth, it's not America anymore, right? It's this multicultural thing inhabited by all kinds of foreigners and people who just they're only tied with each other really outside their little ethnic community, assuming they're blessed enough to have one. They're trying to get everybody. We're in America to make money. America's this cash cow. We came here to make money, And so the polity, all the civic relationships are inherently vicious, right? In the original sense, based on a vice, which is avarice. So it's just this mess, right? So even the nice parts, the nice suburbs, are just spiritually, psychologically, culturally, sociologically, it's a cesspool. It's a nightmare, right? And then I drive out. I leave. When I'm in my little church, I'm so happy. We're serving liturgy. We're just lifted up above this world. We're not worried about all this politics and stuff. But then you go out and then you see the reality. That you're in this multicultural nightmare. And then I drive out, I get my little car, and I drive out, and then as I get closer, I get farther away from the city and get closer back to my native soil. You just feel like a normal human being again. Here I'm sitting in my little town in Michigan, and I see people who look like me. They have names like me. I'm an Allen. Next door to me is a Clark. On the other side is a Jones. Across the street is an Alcock. We live on Greenwood Street. That makes me happy. That's normal, right? That's because I have a normal psychology. All right, not because I'm a bigot or a racist, or whatever. I'm just a normal human being. Okay, so we live, all of us. We live in this multicult nightmare empire owned by non-Christian, anti-Christian, anti-European plutocrats. But on the local level. And this is my point in my excursus, my little footnote talking about my little town in Michigan. We still have so many functioning institutions coming from the early American Republic. We still have the small town government. We still have people who go to church. They're the wrong churches, unfortunately, but at least they go, right? And we still have ties in the small towns at least, the ties of blood and soil and history. I live 45 minutes from where my paternal grandfather was born in 1883. My paternal grandfather, George Allen, was born in Muncie, Michigan in 1883. I live 45 minutes from there. Okay, the Allens are buried here in this soil. Okay, so there's still a real America. And also there are still, within our constitutional system, there are so many layers of defenses because of so many state and local institutions and community institutions. So we can still function. Especially if we know where to look for the real America, we can still function. And we also still have many just laws. America still has many just and wise laws. And glory to God. Thank God for that. And you have to be grateful for that. And so we obey the laws that are still just and in accord with God's holy will, and that are pleasing to Him. And we pay our taxes, and we obey the government, right? We're not anarchists, but we keep in mind that but we're also not chronologically provincial, right? We're not. Remember that this being chronologically provincial is a mark of a narcissist, as Christopher Lasch points out in his seminal work, Culture of Narcissism. So we're not chronologically provincial. We know our past, right? We know as Orthodox Christians, as heirs of Orthodoxy and Romanitas, right? The whole Roman tradition and the whole ancient medieval Christian tradition, whether East or West. We know our history, and we know the role of monarchy, and we know the writings of the fathers, and we know the Bible about monarchy. And so, but I'm not saying that to be an Orthodox you have to be this dreamy kind of, monarchy buff who watches videos about Queen Elizabeth's enthronement and has keeps up with what Prince Harry is doing, all this kind of nonsense about being enamored of the current royals, who are basically a case of now have become a degenerate case of cosmopolitan globetrotters who are in the pockets of the non-Christian plutocratic elite and who just appear on the pages of tabloids. We're real monarchists in the sense that we understand the theological and philosophical, historical basis of monarchy, and so we're at peace. We don't have to be freaking out because our country's not a monarchy. We love America because we live in America, and America feeds us and protects us. So we'd be idiots, right, to just rail against America. So we obey the laws, and we respect American traditions and customs that don't conflict with God's law. All right. So thus, monarchy. I think I've given you enough to think about for now. Now, excursus B, nationalism. Woo! That even has a nastier sound, right? If you have all the leftist brainwashing, nationalism has an even worse sound than monarchism. But what's this thing about church and nations? Where does that come from? Matthew 28, the Great Commission. Our Lord Jesus Christ summons the disciples. He's about to ascend from the earth, and he gives them their command, their first marching orders. And he says, go forth and make disciples of all nations. The Greek is matitevsate panda ta ethni. Make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. So there are two aspects here. Making disciples, not just teaching them. The King James translation, teach, is not adequate. To make a disciple, in other words, to really convert someone to a wholehearted belief, conversion, and wholehearted way of life. A disciple is someone who walks. He doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk, right? So make disciples of all nations, not all individuals, not atomi, not individuals, but ethni, the nations. So discipleship encompasses the whole of your life, and the nation is the natural unit of spiritual identity. The nation is a natural unit of spiritual identity. Right? That's why we have Orthodox nations. Right? So in actual church history, in one form or another, we have ethnic churches. Now, the ethnos, or the yenos, the race, may have lived under an imperial rule, but when the imperial rule was functioning properly, whether in the Byzantine Empire or even, willy-nilly, the Ottomans, or willy-nilly the Habsburgs, or the Romanovs, our Orthodox autocrats. When the empire is functioning properly, they respect the nations living within the empire. Because empire is not a nation; empire is a polity, and empire is a form of government. Okay, but different nations can live within the empire. As much as we Orthodox Slavic or Balkan nations resented the Habsburgs, we were actually much better off under the Habsburgs than in the European Union, right? They came through and taxed us, and sometimes forcibly tried to convert us to Catholicism, but they didn't utterly destroy the very identity and soul of the people the way the European Union does. Sergio Trifkovic, a current Serbian foreign policy analyst and historian and philosopher, says, he's laughing ruefully, because as he's Orthodox Slav, and so, he's laughing ruefully and saying, we used to call the Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the prison of the nations, but nowhere is it near the EU as a prison of the nations. So, getting back to my point, is that an empire, when it's functioning properly, in a godly way, encourages the nations under its rule to keep their own national customs, their mores, their forms of family life, and so forth and so on, their culture, their arts, and so forth. But also another form is a national government, where Bishop Nikolai Vladimirovich has a tremendous sermon on this, on the superiority of national government, where one race inhabits one piece of land and has a single polity. And that's also quoted recently by Matthew Rayfield Johnson in one of his talks. So there's also the imperial government, there's the national government. The important thing is that the nation flourishes, whether it's under this imperial government or under a purely national government, that the nation flourishes. And where the national life is flourishing, then concomitantly in symphonia, right, the church life is flourishing. Now, some people try to contrast patriotism and nationalism. They say, well, patriotism's good, like Macron, who of all people, Macron, lecturing us on patriotism, right? Mr. Prostitute of the global elite, Mr. Macron. So Macron gave this, Emmanuel Macron is the current head of the French government, right? He's the current representative of the Rothschilds to the French people. But so Macron gave this talk last year where he's talking about there's patriotism, which is good, and nationalism, which is bad. But historically, patriotism and nationalism are simply two legitimate aspects of the love of one's own. The love of one's own. And if you don't love your own, you can't love the other, right? If you don't love your own, you can't love the other. If you think you can love the other and not love your own, you're lying to yourself. Okay? This is leftist love, for the other, which is you hate your own and you kill your own, pretending to love mankind, right? You can't love your own. You can't love the other until you love your own. You start with loving your own, which is why God created the family and nations, because God created human nature, right? And He understands human nature, and He knows that the school of love it goes out in concentric circles. There's the hearth, the family, love of child for the parents, love of child for the family, then the clan, the community, the nation, which is an extended family, right? So patriotism and nationalism are two aspects of love of one's own, each reflecting the masculine and feminine principles respectively. So patriotism reflects the masculine principle in family life and in national life, and nationalism, it refers to the feminine or maternal principle, because patriotism is from patria. Your patria is your fatherland. Or in Russian is the Otechество, right? And that refers to the masculine aspect of the ideology, the received mores, customs, and culture of the people, which is protected by the patriarchy and is passed on. Men are the ones who defend and aggressively fight for the patrimony of their nation, right? So the patria is the fatherland, regarded from the aspect of the received history, tradition, culture, religion, so forth of the people, which is the masculine principle. And then the nationalism. Oh, that's my phone going off, but I'm sorry about that. So I get not turning off my cell phone. Cell phones. Ugh. Do you remember life before cell phones? I do. It was great. People say you can't turn back the clock. Well, yes, you can. If we chose to. Nation is from the Latin word relating to birth, right? The greeting on Christmas, Christus natus est, Christ is born. Natalism, the movement regarding childbirth and motherhood, your natal soil, the soil where you were born. So nation refers to the people sharing the same birth. In Greek, we have the word yenos, to yenos, are the homogenea, right? So these the people sharing the same birth, the same DNA, the same blood, are the nation as a people, which is our mother. Okay, so patriotism and nationalism are just two aspects of the same thing. And the patriot's motto is non sibi sed suis, not for oneself, but for one's people. Okay. And if you don't love your family and you're not patriotic, you are not a good Christian. I'll say that again. If you don't love your family and you're not patriotic, you're not a good Christian, no matter what you think you are. No Christian is a citizen of the world. No Christian is a cosmopolitan. Citizens of the world and cosmopolitans are enemies of the church. Non sibi sed suis. It's a beautiful motto. I learned that motto as a child because, in a funny way, my father, living in uptown New Orleans, was a great fan of the Tulane football team, which is very tragic because they were terrible for all of our lives. And the motto of Tulane University is non sibi sed suis, which is the old model of the state of Louisiana before we were conquered in the 1860s. And then the motto became Union, Justice, and Confidence, imposed by the Reconstruction government. But the old motto is non sibi sed suis, and it remains on the seal of Tulane University. So I saw this growing up as a child. It meant a lot to me. Non sibi, not for oneself. Non sibi, that's the dative of oneself. Not for oneself, sed suis, the dative plural of for one's own, right? Not for oneself, but for one's own. Not for oneself, but for one's people. That's the motto of the patriot. And the symbol of the state of Louisiana and the symbol of Tulane University and the symbol of the Catholic Archdiocese of New Orleans is the mother pelican tearing her breast to feed her young. That's an ancient legend that the pelican would feed her. She would tear her breast. If she didn't have food to give her young, she would tear her breast to give her flesh and blood to her young. And that's a symbol of the patriot. It's also an ancient symbol of Christ, giving his flesh and blood to us in the Holy Eucharist. Okay, so are there distortions of nationalism? Of course, there's a distortion of there can be a distortion of every good thing, right? So, yeah, there's extreme militarism, jingoism, xenophobia. There is real xenophobia. Now, most of the time nowadays, when people say xenophobia, they just mean you love your own nation or you love your own race, and therefore you hate everybody else, right? But that's a lie, right? So today what's called xenophobia, most of the time is simply normal patriotism. But there is real xenophobia where you have this kind of psychotic, pathological hatred of other people just because they're not like you. They don't look like you, or they don't eat the same food you eat, or whatever. They're just from somewhere else. But today there's mostly false accusation of xenophobia, fascism, and all this kind of thing. This is because of the brainwashing. The New World Order elites have brainwashed people to believe that any love of one's own race, love of one's own language, love of one's own nation is some form of sinful or evil, pathological activity that they brand with names like they just think of stuff they'll throw at you. It's fascism, it's anti-Semitism, it's whatever, racism. Oh, that's the big one now, racism, so forth. But all this is a nonsense, of course. So St. Metropolitan Philaret, a new hieroconfessor of New York, has a little book he wrote for young people. He loved the youth very much, and he wrote a series of essays for young people called On the Law of God. On the Law of God. It's available in paperback form from Holy Trinity Monastery in Jordanville. Also, you can find it online at the late Bishop Alexander Miliant's website. And I've got the URL, I've got the link in my notes. And he has in his chapter on family and society and patriotism, he contrasts patriotism with cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism is not love of the other. It's not the Good Samaritan, right, who loves the other race. Cosmopolitanism is rootlessness and not refusing to identify with your own race. Okay, what made the Good Samaritan so good was that while fully identifying with his own race, he also loved the Jewish traveler. Okay, and the Samaritans and Jews hated each other. The Good Samaritan loves the Jewish man who falls prey to the thieves, right? But that love is only supernatural love. It's only grace-filled love precisely because the Samaritan does love his own first, and because the other really is a stranger. You can't have xenophilia. You can't have love for the stranger unless there really is such a thing as a stranger, right? You can't have union between man and wife unless there really is such a thing as men and women. So cosmopolitanism is the idea that there are no nations, there are no loyalties. You just roam around the world and make the most out of it, and you become a parasite and just suck wherever you can. And that's what the cosmopolitans do. That's what the cosmopolitan element has always done. Now then the question, okay, that's fine and good. Say, Father Stephen, I understand historically, if you're an Orthodox Serb, you're an Orthodox Russian, you're Orthodox Greek, you're Orthodox Romanian, you love your nation. And that works really well with being Orthodox. It all works together, right? But what is my nation if I'm living in America? Or in some historically non-Orthodox country? So let's back up. If you're living in a historically Orthodox country, like Serbia or Greece or Romania, it's your duty to fight for the restoration of your nation and of your nation's historic monarchy. That's your duty. Plain and simple, black and white. A truly pious Orthodox Christian living in a historic Orthodox country, so you're living in Russia, you're living in Greece, you're living in Romania, you're living in Serbia, you're living in Bulgaria, it is your duty, not just an option, it's your duty as a son of the church also to be a son of your nation, but your nation in the historical sense of the true nation, not this postmodern secular democratic nightmare based on the love of money, okay, and every vice imaginable, okay, to fight for your nation, to give your blood for the church and for the nation. That's your duty. But what if I'm living in America? And for my fellow Americans, my fellow Anglophones, and for all of my fellow Orthodox, maybe you're immigrants but are living in America and want to be American, and I'm happy you want to be American. I mean, I'm an American, and my ancestors created this beautiful country, and now you're enjoying it, and I want you to enjoy it. I don't want you to like it. Um, uh, let's reflect on some aspects of how to think of ourselves as Americans. And excuse me if y'all who are listening to this, some of you aren't Americans. Just excuse me for a minute when I say we Americans, and I think you'll benefit from. You'll know what I'm talking about. You'll benefit from the talk. So for us Americans, how do we think about this? Well, one thing is to remember that our ancestors came from ancient Western nations that had an Orthodox history. All right, whether it's the British Isles or Gaul, France, or and so forth. Our ancestors at one point were Orthodox. In my list of the living and the dead, when I pray for the repose, I always say, and for all my Orthodox ancestors. I know I had Orthodox ancestors. I may have had ancestors converted by the apostles, the apostolic generation in Gaul and in Britain. So we think about that. We think about our ancient Western saints. And we go. It's important, as if you're an Orthodox of Western background, if you can afford it, if you have time, go back and make pilgrimages not only to current Orthodox or recent Orthodox countries like Greece or Romania, but to go back to your own ancestral land. I was very moved when I was in France. I've been to France a few times. On my mother's side, I have French ancestry, and to go back, going back to France, we were in the Vendée. We made a pilgrimage to the Vendée, where there was this noble martyric uprising against the atheist government in the 1790s. And going to different towns and villages and seeing the relics of ancient saints, whole villages, whole towns named for Orthodox saints, and seeing their relics, and it was really moving, and it gives you that sense of rootedness. I looked around and said, yes. You say, this is mine. These are my roots. Realize that we're not rootless cosmopolites. We have a real history. We all had mothers. We all had fathers, right? We all have the blood of our ancestors flowing in our veins. And we have Orthodox ancestors, right? And we have Orthodox saints who had Western names, Latin names, and Anglo-Saxon names, and Germanic names, and they're real saints, and they're praying for us. So to get grounded by being in touch with our ancient Western Orthodox saints. And also now about America. America has a real history. There are real Americans. There are real people who came here from Europe, and they conquered this country, and they fought the Indians, and yes, they killed Indians, and yes, they owned slaves. And you know what? If you don't like that, get over it. I'm not ashamed of it. And I'm just going to move on. Because these people, my ancestors, were noble and brave, courageous, industrious, and they created this beautiful country. So if anybody doesn't like the fact that we fought the Indians or owned slaves, you can go back to where you came from. Because we're not interested in your opinion. So America has a real history, and there are real Americans. My people came here 300 years ago, 200 years ago. The Allens came here in the 1600s. The Lacombes came here in the 1790s. And I'm really touched, really touched when I meet recent immigrants, especially our fellow Orthodox immigrants who love America. And they're interested in our history. They're often more interested in our history than the Joneses and the Smiths are, sadly, because Jones and the Smiths have been brainwashed, or just lazy and are ungrateful, don't care about their ancestors. And I'm really touched when we have recent immigrants, and they really want to learn. They take courses in American history. They value our Constitution. They value the history of the colonies. They value the sacrifices made during the Civil War and all these things that often, the older Americans like me don't value. So America has a real history, and we have to appreciate America for what it really is. For its, rough spots, smooth spots, everything else. So to love America. My distant relative and one of my heroes, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, for the end of his life, he gave an interview to a journalist. It was a northern journalist, because the Davises had many connections to northern friends. And Mrs. Davis, in her widowhood, actually lived in New York. But Mr. Davis, toward the end of his life, a journalist, I think it's from one of the New York periodicals, came and said, Mr. Davis, what is your final word to the American people? And he said, tell them I only loved America. And we have to love America, okay? Because we live here. Like I said, America feeds us. America defends us. We have to love America. So study the history of the real America, okay? But the real America, functionally, today in 2019, the real America is dead or dying, right? It's dead or almost dead. So we need to form small, tight-knit communities of faith and shared culture. Small, tight-knit communities of faith and shared culture. And it may be that you listen to this, you're an ethnic Orthodox. Probably many of you are. Many of you are Greeks, Greek Americans, Greek Canadians, and are from other historically, recently ethnically Orthodox groups. Not people who were Orthodox 1,000 years ago, but who are Orthodox right up till now. And there is absolutely nothing un-American. And I will say this very, very forcefully. There is absolutely nothing un-American but forming a tightly knit ethnic community where you keep your old language and you keep your institutions, and if you are of European Christian origin, I'm going to say this very carefully, if you are of European Christian origin and you form a tightly knit ethnic community where you keep speaking your own language as well as English, and you even have your own newspapers and radio stations and your own periodicals in your own language, you are not the enemy of America. You are the bulwark of America. I'm going to say that again. If you are of European Christian origin and you work with your local clergy, you work with your local community leaders to form small, tightly knit ethnic communities where you keep speaking your own language and having your own institutions and your own folkways, and this is preserved and you pass on to your children, you have done a service to America. And you are a bulwark of America. And never forget it. There's a great book. It's a sad book. It's a great book by a man named E. Michael Jones. I'm probably going to get pounded for mentioning E. Michael Jones, right? Because people say he's a racist, he's a, whatever, anti-Semite, blah, blah. E. Michael Jones is a brilliant, heroic Catholic author who's written about the destruction of the Christian culture of America. He has a book called The Slaughter of the Cities. Slaughter of the Cities by E. Michael Jones. And it's how the federal government, and sadly aided and abetted by the Roman Catholic hierarchy, destroyed the Catholic ethnic neighborhoods in America's cities. Okay? Because by the mid-20th century, the Protestant ethic and the Protestant ethos had really been so watered down that the Protestant churches could no longer carry the moral banner for America, carry the banner of moral life. But just think of this. When I was born in 1957, America was a country of 180 million people, and nearly one-third of those people were Roman Catholics. And most of them, a few of them were like my people. I mean, we were down in Louisiana before it was even part of the United States. But most, and a lot of us, some of us were Hispanic Catholics, right, who lived in Texas or New Mexico or California even before it was part of the United States. But most Catholics in America were ethnic immigrants living in big cities in the North, in the Northeast or the Midwest. Think of all the industrial cities, name them all, okay? And these Catholic ethnic communities were tightly knit. They had their own schools, their own language newspapers, their own ethnic neighborhoods, their own restaurants, their own everything. And of course, we Orthodox did too, but we're just much smaller percentage than the Catholics, right? But we had the same thing, right? The Greek neighborhood, the Ukrainian neighborhood, the Russian enclave, whatever. So these ethnic communities, mostly Catholic but also Orthodox, were the bulwark of the cities, and they voted. By the way, they all voted Democrat. But remember, the Democrats at that time were the party of cultural conservatism. It's hard to believe now. Hard to believe now, but it's true. And they were the bulwark of morals in America in the 20th century. And the slaughter of the cities is about the destruction of the cities through so-called urban renewal, so-called civil rights programs, blah, 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 that destroyed the ethnic communities of European origin in the inner cities, drove them out to the suburbs, split them all up, fragmented them, drove them out to the suburbs to create these generic Catholic parishes and generic Orthodox churches, think OCA, right? And destroyed this bulwark of this unity of the ethnos, or the ethnic tradition, and the religion. and which was actually a great bulwark and an adornment of America. It was not anti-American. It was an adornment of America and a bulwark of America. So if you're an Orthodox living in America, but you have this ethnic background, you fight for your ethnic church, and you fight for ethnic traditions. This is not anti-American, and it's not anti-Christian. If you're somebody like me, you're a vanilla Orthodox. Okay, you have different ways you can go. Insofar as community, you can decide to adopt another culture. Orthodox culture, you can to a great extent, without being phony, but in all sincerity, you can be adopted by an ethnic community and learn their language, be part of them. That doesn't violate who or what you are, right? But if you want to build a truly American Orthodox community, of course you have to use the inherited music or chant style, iconography, and so forth and so on of the whatever national hierarchy you're under, whether Greeks or Russians or Armenians, whoever they are. But then you have your services in English. You emphasize your Western saints. You emphasize the true history of America and the good, the virtues, and the courage of the American frontiersmen, patriots, and so forth. Anything in American history that blends well with Orthodoxy. And a lot of things in American history do blend well with Orthodoxy. I mean, Orthodoxy has no argument with industry, with thrift, with loving freedom, with courage in war, with all these virtues that Americans over the time have exemplified very beautifully. All right. So, and also remember that all of us, as Christians of European origin, we all share Romanitas. In Latin, Romanitas, in Greek, Romiosini. We're all Romans. We're all the heirs of the Greco-Roman Christian synthesis. And we can always go back to those roots, study those roots, to see what unites us, both spiritually and culturally. So is it possible to be Orthodox and be American? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And the better Orthodox you are, and the more in love you are with your own tradition, your own history, your own people, your own blood, your own nation, your own language, the more in love you are with that, the more you are non sibi sed suis, the better Orthodox you are. The better Orthodox you are. I do have an appendix to my notes today. The appendix is a summary of our course on Cain to Constantine by Vladimir Moss. And so that's at the end of my notes today, and it's the notes actually that I used in my last lecture in that course. So today I'm going to, besides posting this podcast, I'm going to open a new show in Spreaker called Orthodox Politics, and I'm going to post the MP3 of our first class on politics based on Moss's Cain to Constantine. But I'm also, in my notes today, I've got the notes that summarize the whole course, which was the notes of my last lecture in that course. Remember, that course actually was inspired by the Trump election, because we've just gone through the whole incredible journey of that whole election where Trump got elected, and then everybody was screaming and yelling at each other. And I said, we've got to do this course, because we have to get back to first principles and not just scream and yell. And so we did this course on politics. So there's this appendix at the end of my notes today, which you're going to find at orthodoxtruth.org. Orthodoxtruth.org, look for the notes for today. And then I'm also going to, besides this podcast on Orthodox Survival Course, look on Spreaker for the new show called Orthodox Politics. There won't be much on it, I'm afraid, because I can only find 2 or 3 of the MP3s from that course. But I'll find whatever I can. And so, as we approach our national holiday of Thanksgiving, I wish all of you, if you don't hear from me before Thanksgiving, I wish all of you a very happy Thanksgiving. May God have mercy and save America. Amen.